Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Penscast Mailbag. I am your host, Garrett Bahana. As always, alongside me is fellow contributing writer over at Pensburg.com and co-host of the Penscast and the Penscast Mailbag. It is Robbie Noggle. Robbie, we talked just a couple of days ago, more recently, about Mike Sullivan's the hot seat and Mike Sullivan's potential to return and remain as Pittsburgh Penguins head coach. And as we mentioned in last week's episode on Friday or Saturday, whichever day it went out, we will be scaling back content here at the Skating Penguin Network for the foreseeable future until we get some general manager news, front office news, whatever you want to use to describe it. However, we still will be having a weekly Penscast mailbag episode throughout the offseason. So at the very least, from now until whenever a new general manager and front office is put in place, we will be here giving you some fun and entertaining mailbag topics to answer, thanks to your participation on Twitter. So, Robbie, as always, we will get this mailbag underway, and you get question number one here. Question number one comes from Brendan, and he is talking about a potential acquisition of Juuse Saros, a goaltender that you mentioned and we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. What would it cost to get Juuse Saros, and would you actually pull the trigger and trade for him? For example, would you possibly trade Jake Guentzel, your 2023 first-rounder, and goalie prospect Joel Blomqvist for a player like Juuse Saros?
Well, if the Predators are in a position where they're moving on from Saros, I think they're going into at least a moderate-type rebuild. There's still some good pieces there on that team, but Juuse Saros is Predators' version, basically, of Ilya Sorokin in New York with the Islanders. Some good pieces around him, but he is the staple. He is the backbone of what that team is able to do. And he was really the reason that Nashville was in the playoff fight until the final 2 or 3 games in the West. So Saros' price, if he's available, is going to be high. Not only his price of acquisition, but also his contract price. So you have to kind of factor in both those variables, and starting with his acquisition price. If they're going into like a moderate rebuild, it's going to be big time on picks. So I'm thinking you're probably going to need at least 2 first-round picks to get him. Blomqvist probably moves the needle a little bit because they're going to need a goaltender in the system. I'm not ready to give up on Joel Blomqvist quite yet. He really just came to North America, just got a taste of hockey at the end of the AHL season with Wilkes-Barre, and he's going to begin his North American career in full next season. So, again, I don't know if that would necessarily be necessary. I think what they'd be looking for is more assets, as in terms of picks. And I don't know if Guentzel is necessarily on that radar. And I'm not really a fan of trading Jake Guentzel. I know that he's been kind of been more of a hot button topic the last few years, but I mean the kid still went out and scored 36 goals this year on what was considered a down year. A lot of people had him pegged at a 50-goal scorer. Didn't quite get there, but I don't think that he's someone you just toss away. If the option was there and the price is right, then yeah, I make the trade. I'm not sure if Jake Guentzel fits that comfortable price for me, but I'm more comfortable with moving picks, even in a draft like this. I mean, if that pick turns into a top 4 pick, and you're talking about a potential franchise player in this year's draft, especially how deep it is to the top, maybe you try to go a different direction. But if Saros really would be on the market and the asking price is right, I think you have to at least have the discussion about bringing him into Pittsburgh. You could probably get the right contract to work. He is that good. He immediately feels a massive need for the Penguins in goal. So, I mean, overall, I couldn't say no to it if the price is right, just because I'm that high on Saros. But if they demand too much or his contract price comes in too much, then I'm fine with saying I'm fine with moving in a different direction and seeing what else is out there. Trading for a goaltender is not easy. That's why you don't see it done all that often. At least not. I mean, sometimes you'll see prospect goalies move back and forth, but for the most part, I don't see Saros coming to Pittsburgh unless the deal's right. But if the deal is right, then I'm all for it. Question number 2 is from Brian. Although it's very weird feeling not being in the playoffs, I'd rather this than be in and get completely embarrassed. Maybe this is a wake-up call the organization needed to make the proper changes to compete.
I think at the very least, what you're seeing so far through the first round of the postseason is that had the Penguins gotten in and had they punched their ticket and clinched a playoff berth, I don't see any way that they would have made it past the first round, even with Crosby and Malkin. It doesn't look all too favorable for the Panthers and the Islanders, the teams that the Penguins were fighting with to clinch a playoff spot in the first place. So to Brian's point, you hate to see it because it stings, and you want Crosby and Malkin and Letang to be in the postseason for however much longer they're playing. But like Brian said, maybe this is the wake-up call now Fenway Sports Group needed. I'd be curious to go into a different timeline and see, had the Penguins made the playoffs, how much success would it have taken for Ron Hextall to remain the general manager of the Penguins? Would it be a win in the first round? Would he have been fired had they lost in the first round anyway? I'd also like to know how far in advance FSG knew that Hextall was going to be fired anyway. It would be extreme to say anything short of a Stanley Cup results in a firing, but if Hextall had gotten out of the first round, maybe had a longer series in the second round with the team that he built, maybe he's still here. But yeah, this, at the very least, this was going to be a wake-up call for the players and the executives in this organization. Hopefully the new general manager comes in and he can sort of retool on the fly. It's easier said than done considering some of the contracts that the Penguins have on their books right now. That is a conversation for when the new general manager and hockey operations department is put in place. But yeah, I agree. This is probably a big wake-up call, even for the relatively new owners in the Fenway Sports Group collective. Question number 3 comes from Brian. Where do you think this season goes if these front office changes were made sooner? Maybe if they were made a few weeks before the trade deadline, meaning if Ron Hextall and company were fired, do you think the season could have been salvaged and potentially earning a playoff berth?
I'll go as far as to say maybe they earn a playoff berth. Maybe the Granlund trade, likely the Granlund trade isn't made. Maybe they make a different move that works out a little bit better, or just do nothing, which may have been the best choice in the end altogether. So yeah, maybe if they make those changes midseason, something different happens. Again, I don't think they wanted to make the change in season just because it seems like Fenway Sports Group has big overhaul plans for the Penguins. So if any change would have made on an interim basis, therefore not much happening, and maybe they still squeak. I mean, even with the changes they did make, they were within a point of making the playoffs in the end. So maybe, who knows? Maybe they do. Maybe there is a little more fire under them if that front office was cleaned out before the season, but I don't think it makes much of a difference. Maybe they squeak in. Maybe it's the same result. I think it's a 50-50 toss-up as to how it plays out if they would have made any kind of front office changes before the season. But I think in the end, Fenway Sports Group had no plans on doing that, and their plan was to do it at the end of the season to begin with. So, yeah, I think it's a 50-50 toss-up as to what happens if that change is made. But, yeah, I wouldn't say it's too drastic one way or the other. Question number 4 from Brian. We all know what Brian Burke's job title was, but what did he actually do?
Instead of making a joke and saying Brian Burke did nothing while he was here, the president of hockey operations, that title, again, I wasn't in the room with Hextall and Burke, but I can't imagine the president of hockey operations held much weight in terms of personnel decisions and putting the team together on the ice. I could be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong. Again, Brian asked the question because we still to this day and maybe never will really understand what Brian Burke did with the organization. But I imagine Ron Hextall was in charge of player personnel, putting the on-ice team together, while Burke was maybe in charge of some more executive type decisions, business type decisions that really don't have much of an impact on what you see on the ice on a nightly basis. The president of hockey operations is more or less of something of an advisory position. I don't think, unless I'm proven wrong, I don't think Brian Burke really had too much influence on the players that Ron Hextall and his confidants acquired. In the end, Brian Burke as president of the hockey operations, it will remain a mystery to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, I think it was more or less just a fancy title with a name like Brian Burke, who is recognizable in a lot of hockey circles. He's been around the block a long time, and now he'll just go back to. I imagine he's just going back to do TV analyst work in Canada. So he hopped right back on his feet after getting out of Pittsburgh and going right back up to be a TV analyst, probably. So good for him. Question number 5. Robbie, I left this question for you. The next question comes from Brian, and it's not really a question. It's more or less a statement. I'm as surprised as maybe anybody that the Pittsburgh Pirates are having as much early season success as they are. So, Robbie, I know you're a baseball guy. Have you been following the Pirates closely, and how confident are you that the Pirates can sustain this level of success?
I mean, yeah, huge baseball fan, and obviously following the Pirates. It's been fun so far this season, and that's really, I mean, when your expectations for your baseball team is, I hope they don't lose 100 games. Anything like this I consider a win, and I'll take that over what the alternative could have been. And see, didn't start off great this season. Struggled. They were 1-2 out of the gate, and then since then they're 15-5, I think. Just been remarkable since then. They have, as of this recording, they've won 7 in a row. Everybody points out that they've been doing it against bad teams. Well, hey, good teams beat bad teams. So can they keep it up? I honestly think the offense is legit. I think the offense is very well positioned to have a very big year and carry them, and that's without O'Neal Cruz. If they can stay in that mix until he gets back in August, then they've done their job. The pitching has been otherworldly. They had I think it was 10 or 11 straight quality starts, which was almost like a modern day record. It was like 1 or 2 short of the record, and every team kind of in that mix of them had made the playoffs in the past. And the pitching has been excellent. It's been far exceeded my expectations. I believe it will regress a little bit. I think they're maybe pitching a bit above their head, but I don't know if it's going to regress to the point where I thought it was going to be. I really thought the pitching was going to be the true Achilles heel of this team, and by that I mean just downright dreadful. And yeah, there's been some shaky moments, especially in the first 2 weeks of the season. But during the 7-game win streak, they've been utterly phenomenal. One of the best units in the bigs. And I'm really excited to see what this kind of group can do. Mitch Keller, who has been kind of a whipping boy for Pirates fans, has been excellent. And him being what they thought he's going to be the whole time is an absolutely massive development for this team. And if you're a Pirate fan and you're not happy with this, you're lying or you're not actually paying attention. Nobody expected them to be 9 games above 500 at this point. They, as of this recording, currently lead the NL Central, and they have some big games coming up, though. Some big prove-it games against the Dodgers, the Rays. I know the Blue Jays are in there too. So some prove-it games coming up, and hey, obviously they're not going to win out. It's baseball. You're not going to win your next 150-some games and end the season 152-7 or something like that. But if you can just stay within the playoff conversation until O'Neal Cruz gets back, then, man, I'm all for it then. And I'm really excited. And I think most of Pittsburgh is excited. And if they're still playing good ball here around Memorial Day, it's going to be a fun summer in Pittsburgh. So get out to the park and support that team because it's going to be a pretty fun atmosphere. And if you remember back in 2013 through 15, when the Pirates were really good, how crazy that ballpark was, I think we'll see it again here if the Pirates can keep this up. Question number 6, again from Brian. Whoever becomes the new GM, you have to hope it's someone who will give Mike Sullivan players that complement his system. I never understood why Jim Rutherford traded away pieces of that speed game that worked so well, and I don't even want to comment on what old Ron Hextall did with his moves.
I think Robbie mentioned it I think it was last week's mailbag, where he was answering a question regarding Jim Rutherford and how much blame Jim Rutherford should take for where the Penguins are now. And it comes down to, I think that you could see the beginning of the end happen when Rutherford traded their first round pick for Ryan Reeves, because as Robbie mentioned, Tom Wilson got into Rutherford's head at that point, and he felt the Penguins were soft and they didn't have anybody to protect the Stars. So that's where that sort of philosophy came in and probably started to butt heads with what Mike Sullivan wanted to do. And that takes me to Ron Hextall. I don't even understand the moves that Hextall made. To his credit, him trading for and extending Rickard Rakell was probably the highlight move of his tenure. However, extending Jeff Carter and trading for Mikael Granlund really go against everything that Mike Sullivan, at least publicly, has been saying, and how he sort of deploys his team and how he runs the whole operation. And that's what never made sense to me, is that Mike Sullivan holds, I would imagine, a hefty amount of sway in that locker room, in that organization as a whole, for how long he's been here. Was there really no communication between the general manager and the players he was acquiring and the head coach, who has to put the lineup together and has to put the players out on the ice? I mean, if wires were crossed, I'll never understand why the kind of players that were acquired by Hextall, and to a lesser extent Jim Rutherford, really did not, it was like water and oil. It did not mesh well with what Sullivan had success with early on. And granted, the Stars did get older. They're not really able to play the kind of game that they were playing when they were 27, 28, 29. But even then, you're acquiring a player like Ryan Reeves, Mikael Granlund, Jeff Carter, all of these guys who really don't do anything with speed. They're not blazing skaters. So it doesn't make any sense to me. It boggles my mind. I don't know how much communication there was between the coach and the general manager. But again, yeah, it doesn't make any sense given how Sullivan likes to scheme out his team and the kind of game that he likes to play. Question number 7 comes from Brian. I think the team should look for another top 4 left-handed defenseman to pair with Chris Letang this summer. If Hextall would have done his job and acquired Jacob Chychrun when he cleared all of that cap space, we wouldn't have to have this kind of conversation, or even the Mikael Granlund conversation. Robbie, do you think that the Penguins need to beef up their top 4 this summer?
Yeah, the Chychrun trade's going to sit with us for a while, I think, especially when you look back at the price that Ottawa paid for him. They just dreadful that was passed up on a team like the Penguins without even making an offer, what it sounds like. Yeah, Chychrun with Chris Letang would be awesome. I believe that is going to be Marcus Pettersson. I think that he's definitely earned at least a shot playing on the top pair with Chris Letang now that Brian Dumoulin will be likely headed elsewhere. But I think that Chychrun, it's going to be one that we look back on, especially if he plays well in Ottawa, which all indications from his short spell after the trade deadline up there look like he's going to be a perfect fit for them and that young team and what they're trying to do. I don't know what's out there exactly, what the Penguins are willing to trade. I personally believe that Marcus Pettersson's earned that chance. And then you also have to factor in Ty Smith, Pierre-Olivier Joseph. Are they top 4? Don't know, honestly. Ty Smith, we got a very brief look at. We have really no inclination of what he is or what he can bring. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the coming years. I would give Marcus Pettersson that shot and maybe not make a big splash move on defense. But again, like you mentioned, the Chychrun move, obviously frustrating given what he went for. But the new general manager, he's going to just have to deal with the hand he was dealt. And I like giving Marcus Pettersson a shot up top there. And if that doesn't work out, maybe look for some other potential options. It's not easy trading for a top 4 defenseman in the NHL. It's expensive. Their contracts are expensive. Their acquisition costs are expensive. So it'll be interesting to see what the new management has, what ideas they have for the defense, which will definitely be reworked in some way this offseason. So Whether that includes a new partner for Chris Letang outside the system remains to be seen, but it'll be definitely something to keep an eye on. Question number 8 from Brian. Someone asked about signing JT Compher, who is an unrestricted free agent this summer, but the question was a little too late to make the mailbag. They mentioned him providing scoring while also being able to be a shutdown guy.
Looking at some of his stats here, he had the best offensive season of his career this season. 17 goals, 35 assists, 52 points. He was a +8, played in all 82 games. He's a pretty decent possession player, too. This season was some of his best possession work. 52.3 Corsi 4 percentage, 52.4 Corsi 4 or Fenwick 4 percentage. So right now, I think his cap hit was $3.5 million. So if the Penguins can sign a guy like Compher and bring him in for a depth role like that, 52 points for a depth player like Compher. Granted, he was playing for a team in Colorado that is geared up to be a powerhouse and Stanley Cup favorite. So I'd be interested to see if Colorado extends him at the end of the offseason or if he does hit the open market. But he just turned 28 recently. He's a right-handed shot playing on the wing. I would totally not be against a player like JT Compher coming in and filling out that bottom six compared to what it was last season. That's for sure. Question number 9 comes from Brian. So say in theory we somehow get the 4th overall pick. Do you use it or flip it to Nashville in a potential deal for a player like Juuse Saros? If you do use it, who is the target for you, Robbie? Is it Leo Carlsson, who's projected to be a top 5 pick in this year's NHL draft?
I think you use it personally, unless you feel like you just can't say no to Juuse Saros. I think you use it. The name to watch out for that I've seen popping around with people that are kind of been daydreaming about maybe getting a top 4 pick is I believe it's Matvei Michkov. He is a forward out of Russia. So his basic star comps are Jack Eichel, Patrick Kane, John Tavares, Sidney Crosby. Pretty good there. He is just turned a little over about 18 and a half years old, 5'10", lefty shooter. His star probabilities are 99%. His NHL probabilities are 99%. He's basically guaranteed to be an NHL player. Unless the hockey gods drop everything and decide that Connor Bedard belongs in Pittsburgh with that number 4 selection, which would be one of the funniest possible things that ever happened in the history of the NHL. I just hope that if that happened, that Twitter would hang on long enough for that to happen, because that would be absolutely otherworldly. But I mean, just the Penguins getting a top 4 selection would just blow up Twitter in an absolutely phenomenal way. That the first time the Penguins miss the playoffs in a lifetime for some people, they end up getting a legitimate franchise player. So,
Bobby, I don't want to interrupt you. If you thought Elon Musk buying Twitter was going to be the death nail in that website's coffin, just imagine how Twitter would implode if the Penguins end up with a top 5 pick. I mean, that would be the demise of Twitter, not Elon Musk.
It would
barreling it into the ground.
There would be smoke coming out of the servers if the Penguins were to get a top 4 draft pick. It would be absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, obviously it's fun to dream, and I mean, cross your fingers. I mean, crazier things have happened. Yeah, if they get that, I'd look at a guy like Mishkov, who seems to be one of the big names that is circling around there. I don't know as much about Leo Carlsson, though I have heard the name. After Bedard, there's like 3 or 4 guys that are kind of in that top 5 conversation, and it seems like Adam Fantilli is second, and then it kind of goes on, I guess, what your scouting says. So if the Penguins get that 4th overall pick, the energy from the anger will sustain me until the draft. So no matter who they end up picking there, I'll be happy with it. Question number 10 from Brian. Are the playoffs playing out how you would have thought so far?
For the most part, looking at the brackets right now, Colorado has a 2-1 lead over the Seattle Kraken. However, Seattle has been playing them very tough. I was surprised at just how tough that series has been. That's been no cakewalk for the Avalanche. I know the Avalanche in many circles aren't favored to win, but just how much grit and how much heart and determination, all these buzzwords that I hate using, but they're the perfect descriptors to describe how tough Seattle is playing the defending Cup champions. Dallas and Minnesota tied at 2. I think the last game to tie the series at 2 games apiece came with a little bit of controversy in terms, if you're a Minnesota Wild fan, talking about Marcus Foligno and how much hatred he had towards the referees for what was a shaky tripping call that eventually led the Dallas Stars to win that game 3-2. That series is tied. I think that could go either way. Vegas and the Jets. Right now, Vegas holding a 2-1 lead over the Jets so far. Vegas, I think Vegas is going to end up. I think they have too much star power to compare against the Jets right now. The Jets are still a wild card team. Oilers and Kings. I was watching a little bit of the last game, and I think the Oilers were down 3-0. I think they were down. They had a 3-goal deficit, and it looked like the Kings were really on their way to putting the Oilers on life support. However, McDavid and crew came back to win that game. I think they won it 5-4, if memory serves. However, they won the game and tied the series at 2 games apiece. The Devils have a 2-1 lead over the New York Rangers. I think the Devils will squeak it out maybe in 6 or 7 games. Carolina and Boston are the only teams right now that have 3 games to 1 lead. Carolina is probably going to put the final nail in the Islanders' coffin. The Islanders cannot generate enough offense to survive, and Carolina is an Eastern Conference juggernaut right now. Toronto and Kyle Dubas, if you're paying attention at home for a potential general manager candidate, the Leafs lead the Lightning 2-1 in the series right now. That game I could see that series easily going 7 games, evening up 2 games apiece. Boy, wouldn't it be? It would be absolutely wonderful for the Leafs to blow another first round series, having a 2-1 lead right now. It would just fill me with so much joy. And we'll wrap it up with Boston leading 3-1 over the Panthers. Boston is the head and shoulders favorite to win it all this year, leading 3-1 over Florida. And I imagine they will. If they don't do it in 5, I can't imagine it going past 6. So for the most part, yeah, the early indications throughout round 1 are playing out pretty much how I thought they would. Still a lot to be decided, a lot of meaningful hockey to be played. So we'll see what the remainder of the first round has in store for us. But yeah, for the most part, it's been playing out pretty much how I expected it to. Question number 11 comes from Gino. I was watching the Carolina Hurricanes and New York Islanders series today and couldn't help but imagine if the Pens had acquired Brent Burns instead of Jeff Petrie. Brent Burns' cap hit on Carolina's roster is $5.28 million, while Petrie is $6.25 million. The Canes only paid a third-round pick, Steven Lorenz, and an AHL goalie to get Burns' services. Gino says he can only imagine what the kind of player Burns would be in the black and gold. Robbie, do you agree with Gino's assessment regarding Brett Burns?
Yeah, before I answer, I just want to send a thank you to Evgeny Malkin for tuning into our podcast and submitting
Absolutely
a mailbag question. Very, very, very nice of him to do that, and hopefully he spreads the word around the Penguins locker room when they get back together in the fall to get everybody listening to the podcast. So thank you, Gino, for doing that for us. And back to the question. I think this is a very hindsight kind of answer because the season the Penguins got out of Jeff Petrie is nothing that I think anyone expected. Petrie came in with a very high pedigree. The cap difference, I mean, you're talking about like $1 million. That's not really that much, I'd say. The Penguins did pay a little bit more to get Petrie. But again, Petrie came in with a very, high pedigree of being a great hockey player. If you remember back to the bubble series with the Canadiens, he actually killed the Penguins in that qualifying series. He was such a menace. He's been good going way back to his days in Edmonton. He's been a phenomenal blue line anchor for the teams he's played on. He's been such a steady force. And really what the Penguins got out of him was completely unforeseen. Nobody expected that to be coming, even with his age. And he showed signs of being that guy. It just did not pan out. So where they go from here, I don't know. It's easy to say, yeah, if they acquired Brent Burns now, it'd be completely different. But what we saw to Petrie this year was just completely out of the blue. Nobody expected him to struggle like that. When the trade was made, a lot of people were really high on the trade. They thought Petrie fit in perfectly with what the Penguins are doing. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, so we're kind of back to square one with all that. But it's easy to look back in hindsight and say Brent Burns would have been the better option. But I can't really blame too much on the front office for bringing or making a move like Petrie, given really what he had done his entire career. Again, from our good friend, Mr. Evgeny Malkin. Is keeping Carter as 4C that bad of an option? He obviously doesn't have the step he once did, but can still provide offensively at times. He cannot kill penalties. Faceoffs don't matter, but he finished top 10 in faceoff win percentage. By trading Granlund, Petrie, freeing up close to $12 million, the Pens can upgrade a lot.
Yeah, the Penguins, if they buy out Jeff Petrie and perhaps they do trade, or if they buy out Granlund and perhaps do trade Jeff Petrie or buy out Petrie, I think Petrie is staying on the roster next season, and they do have $20 million to work with by default. So I imagine a Granlund buyout is the most logical step forward there. But looking at Jeff Carter, if Carter has to play, and I no ill will towards Jeff Carter, the player, the person. I think we've both made that abundantly clear over talking about him for what feels like the last year at this point. No ill will towards him, but look, he's washed. He is absolutely washed and should not be on the ice on a regular basis. He intends on coming back next year to finish out his contract. If he has to play, I guess it would be on the fourth line, but do not put him. He cannot go back on the third line. He cannot take those kind of minutes. He'll just get spun around when the opposition is coming into what is the Penguins' defensive zone. It would not be ideal to have Jeff Carter playing any sort of minutes because I think he's just going to be taken advantage of because he can't skate. Yeah, if he gets into the offensive zone, he'll chip in with a goal here and there. Maybe kill some penalties, but I don't want to make it like it's not as simple as perhaps playing the NHL video game and buying out all the bad contracts you don't like. But if you're looking at Mikael Granlund and Jeff Carter, those would have to be the two logical solutions to the two logical contracts for you to buy out this offseason. And you just have to deal with the fact that it may sting in the interim a little bit and hamper you in the interim. You are getting some relief, but with the salary cap projected to skyrocket within the next 2 to 4 years, I think, finally rebounding from COVID, I don't think a buyout is going to be that much of a difference to what the Penguins are trying to accomplish now. Take the hit now, maximize what you can with Crosby and Malkin. If that means let Granlund and Carter both go and say, thanks for your service, we want to go in a different direction, that is what I would do. I would not bring Jeff Carter back. I think his best days are obviously behind him, and I would find perhaps Ryan Poehling has earned the permanent fourth line center role. Perhaps Drew O'Connor, maybe Sam Poulin comes up for more than a cup of coffee if he is all well and ready to go. I know he's been playing some center in the AHL. So the Penguins do have options if they'd like to get younger, which I think they should be trying to do, getting younger and faster and creating a more competent, more effective and efficient bottom six. And that you do not do that by continuing to employ the services and continue to dress players like Mikael Granlund and Jeff Carter. Question number 13, the final question. Oh my goodness, I forgot to put the name of the person who submitted this question. So if you're listening and this is your question, my sincere apologies for not putting your name from the tweet here. But question number 13 for you, Robbie, the final question. What do you think the best and worst trades are in Penguins history, other than the Francis, Samuelson, and Jennings trade for Cullen, Zalapsky, and Parker trade, which is clearly the best, and the Naslin for Stojanov trade, which is clearly the worst?
I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the Hossa trade has to be up there for one of the best trades in Penguin history. Didn't result in a cup, but was the first, oh, hey, we're buying into this the whole thing kind of deal with this next generation of players. The Kessel trade has to be in that conversation as well. I mean, if you look at the trade-off, you gave up almost nothing to get Phil Kessel, who was an integral part of 2 Stanley Cups, arguably could have won a Conn Smythe. So obviously that trade has to be in there. Worst trade, I'll go kind of under the radar bad trade here. But the one that sent Jared McCann to Toronto, it was kind of a foreshadowing of just complete roster mismanagement by the Ron Hextall, Brian Burke front office in Pittsburgh. It just gave Jared McCann away for essentially nothing to get a few. I don't even remember what they got back for him, just because they didn't feel like protecting him. And then he goes to Seattle and scored 40 goals. So yeah, just kind of giving him away for nothing. Other bad, I mean, I can't say that the Granlund trade, he hasn't been like it's a bad trade and might be the worst of. Maybe it is. Yeah, I get. Maybe it is. I mean, I know he was only here for a couple weeks, and if he is somehow on the roster in October, then yeah, that trade's easily one of the worst in franchise history. So I put it as a yes, but with an asterisk, depending on how it all plays out. Yeah, when you take out the Francis trade and the Naslund trade, it kind of limits down onto what all you really can do, what all you can talk about. I live with that Hossa trade just because that was the first buy-in with this new generation, and Hossa was absolutely phenomenal in Pittsburgh. The Kunitz trade has to be in that conversation as well. Kunitz was absolutely phenomenal in Pittsburgh. 3 Stanley Cups. Was kind of the first veteran piece of that Penguins generation. I mean, he was the veteran on that 09 squad that won the Cup, and then he was a veteran piece for years after that, but he was like a veteran piece on that 2009 squad that went to the Cup. So that, and then, yeah, I kind of, the McCann trade is just a bad trade. One of the worst in franchise history. I wouldn't go that far, but low-key bad trade that we'll look back on someday. And we already look back on now as like, man, what a big screw-up and what a foreshadowing to how bad it was going to get.
Alrighty. Well, with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Penscast Mailbag. And as I mentioned at the start, content was probably going to be light for the foreseeable future. If news does break, we will be sure to bring it to you through the Penscast, and we will be the first to let you know when those episodes go live. But for the foreseeable future, plan on having an edition of the Penscast Mailbag delivered to your podcasting platform of choice moving forward throughout the summer months into the off-season as we get deeper and deeper. But until we meet next week, for Robbie Noggle, I have been Garrett Bahana. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Penscast Mailbag, and we will talk to all of you again this time next week.